So I was having a read about good old Lucius the Eternal because I was actually just putting together a video about another much less good character who is Belial, and a few of the things started to come to mind about just how they could make Belial a bit better. So that is a video that is coming for another day. It is coming soon, I promise. But as I was going through some of the characters and some other data sheets in the game to get some ideas about how I would improve Belial, I really started to read about Lucius, and I just wanted to do a video about him because I think he's really actually very good. He is of course a gorgeous new updated model which looks gruesomely Slaneshi, so I love him from that perspective. But his datasheet is also, I think, one of the best character models around in the game at the moment. He just has a little bit of everything aside from shooting, but he is super fast, he's super reliable in combat, he's fairly durable, and he can just be an absolute terror for your opponent. Now, as I mentioned in an earlier video, I will be doing a full codex review for the Emperor's Children. That is coming soon. I just haven't got round to it yet, unfortunately, and I really wanted to get this video done for Lucius. So we're going to dive into his datasheet and talk about him as an individual unit review. But don't worry, the full codex review is coming at some point soon. So Lucius the Eternal, he is quite pricey for an infantry character. He comes in at a fairly spicy 150 points, so he's nearly twice as expensive as something like a generic Marine captain, or even compared to some of the better named Marine characters, he's still 35 points more than Azrael, 30 points more than Mephiston, so he is a very pricey infantry character to bring along. But for that 150 points, you get a surprisingly solid profile. Lucius is a movement 8, toughness 5, 2-up save, 4-up invuln, 6 wound character with your standard 6-up leadership and 1 OC. So it's honestly not too bad. He's the equivalent essentially of a Terminator level captain, but with a really great bit of extra movement, which in the Emperor's Children specifically is a huge bonus because their army rule thrill seekers means that you can charge even after you've advanced. So Lucius can, in a best case scenario, threaten up to 26-inch charges, and even with just average rolling, you're going to be getting a reliable 18 or 19-inch radius where he can threaten to just yeet himself into the enemy. He's also deceptively durable because despite just having the 2-up save, 4-up invuln, which isn't anything super special really, that's on a lot of characters, he does also have a 5-up feel no pain, so those 6 wounds will go quite a bit further than you think. And whilst he is by no means invincible, he ends up being about as durable as something like a 10-man squad of Marines against most targets. So 10 Hellblasters overcharging will only have around a 50-50 chance of killing him, and even a full 6-man squad of Blade Guard veterans will, with average rolling, only do about 5 wounds to him, so he can survive somewhat reliably even against some nasty combat units to get his fights back into them and to try and kill a few of them off. His durability also gets a nice bonus because he has the amazing lone operative rule. Weirdly, he does also have the leader rule. Now this may seem very conflicting, but he's actually quite an interesting character, and one of the reasons why I really do like him is that he can lead flawless blades, but if you choose not to have him leading a unit, he gets that lone operative protection. So he can either go around with some scary melee bodyguards, or he can just wander off solo and be almost impossible for your opponent to deal with, being untargetable outside of 12 inches. And then with his great movement and advance and charge, you can almost guarantee that you can get him into a position where he can make a charge into an enemy unit while staying safe for the most part from their guns. It just all round makes him an incredibly slippery, tricky unit for your opponent to deal with, and for that reason I think keeping him solo for that lone op protection is the best play for him. He can just move up behind cover and just keep him a bit cagey as best you can, get really close to the target you want him to kill, and then at the enemy they really will have a very tough time actually getting rid of him before you are in their lines. So from that perspective, I think he can also be a very strong psychological piece because he can really cause your opponent to worry about him getting too close to their lines and they won't be able to do anything with it. So he can be a big aura of threat where your opponent is going to have to change their battle plan or their movement or what they're potentially going to be charging into or going into if Lucius is there and they know that he can threaten to charge back into them if they get too close to him. In terms of his other rules, he gets a challenge worthy of skill, which grants him full rerolls to hit and to wound against monsters, characters, and walkers. So it's not against all vehicles. You won't get these rerolls against things like rhinos or predators, but any enemy character or any big stompy monster or dreadnought, that kind of thing, he is going to be able to cut through them so incredibly well with those rerolls. And if the enemy has any of those units on the battlefield, which they almost certainly will, they are going to be prime targets for Lucius to go after. He also has the rule Duelist's Hubris, which is another reason that it's great to run him solo. If he isn't leading a unit, he gets fights first. So that means a good 90% of the time, he will be fighting before any enemy units. Essentially, the only time he won't fight first is if he charges into another fight's first unit. So charging into something like the Lion or a unit being led by a Judicia may not be the best idea, but against anything that doesn't have fights first itself, he will likely be going first as long as you don't charge into them. And that makes him even more terrifying to the enemy because, as I said, with things like Heroic Intervention, you can just stick him near to some of your other units and threaten to charge him into a combat even after the enemy has charged in and just wipe out that enemy unit before they can swing into their main target. It once again just makes him so slippery and so tricky to deal with, and as I said, can absolutely impact how your opponent plays their valuable melee units around him. But for all of those tricks and shenanigans, what is Lucius actually like in combat? And I have to say he's actually pretty damn good. He's got two weapon options, both melee. He does have no ranged option, as I said, but in combat you will either have the Blade of the Lair or his Lash of Torment. They are both very, very different, and they excel into very different units. So the Lash of Torment is incredible into those squishy one wound infantry that may try and bog him down, things like guardsmen or gaunts, fire warriors, even orc boys could be a good target for this if they have a character attached to get you those reroll hit and wound rolls, because it's worth noting here, it does specify character unit, not just a character model, so anything being led by a character, he still will get those rerolls against them. Against something like a guardsman, so that toughness 3, 5-up save, 1 wound profile, the Lash will be throwing out 10 attacks at strength 4, -1 AP, 1 damage, and sustained hits 1. So with those rerolls, if they have, say, a Castellan in the unit, that will net you about 9 dead guardsmen, so he really can chew through big roadblocks very, very effectively. The better weapon most of the time, though, I think people would agree, is his Blade of the Lair. This is 6 attacks at strength 8, -3 AP, and a flat 3 damage, which is already a very, very solid profile, but it's just made even better if he's going into a character, a monster, or a walker unit, thanks to the fact that he can get those rerolls on it. It does also have precision, which is great. It means he can very easily snipe out those important characters that may be with a unit, something like a Terminator Captain or Chaplain or Azrael or something hiding in a unit of Inner Circle companions. He can go straight into them and just kill those important characters that in some cases are the linchpin of your opponent's battle plan and sort of play style. Into units like Azrael and Inner Circle companions, he can quite easily pick out Azrael and kill him off, as well as 1 or 2 Inner Circle companions with the 6 attacks and the fact that he is re-rolling hit and wound rolls. And then even into tougher targets, things like Dreadnoughts, he's not going to kill them outright, but he can chunk off a good 6 wounds from things like a Ballistus, so he is quite good at maybe not going into a full health Dreadnought or something like that, but if they've been injured earlier in the game and you've got them in front of you, he can be a really good way to dive in and just finish them off at least somewhat reliably. I think his best use though is as a pure character assassin. He is great at going into a unit even if the character is hidden in a bodyguard unit, because he can just precision them out and he has a very good chance of taking on most characters in the game and killing them out. He's got a slightly better than 50% chance of taking out Abaddon in a single phase, which is actually quite scary considering Abaddon is nearly twice the price as Lucius. So the way to look at him is that he is not an auto delete button. If he does get caught in combat and he doesn't manage to kill what he needs to, he can easily die, especially if you throw him into something big like a Knight or a Primarch or even something like a Redempted Dreadnought. They can do a lot of damage back into him, but sending him into a unit that's got a character he's just a very good precision tool rather than a sledgehammer. Being able to dive into a unit, kill a character, maybe a couple of models from the unit, means that he can get his job done, and he can also usually kill enough so that he can survive the attacks back. And then in the next fight phase, of course, he's going to have fight first again, so he can then finish that unit off and go to be a nuisance somewhere else on the battlefield. So he almost doesn't want to dive in and kill everything in one turn. He wants to dive in, kill enough so that he can survive the attacks back, then finish them off the next fight phase, and then move off to fight something else later on. And I mean, that's why I think he's so good if you run him solo. But as I said, you can run him with a unit. The only thing he can join in the codex is the Flawless Blades. If you do want to do that, it does of course add to his cost. 3 Flawless Blades are 110 points, so that immediately bumps it to a 260 point unit, or 370 points if you run a maxed squad. And whilst they do give him a very nice buff, they've got a rule called Demonic Patrons, which essentially gives them the ability to wound anything in the game on a 3+. So now Lucius will be wounding even knights on 3+. And of course, being into some character units, he can get the rerolls as well. So he can be wounding things like knights on a 3+ rerollable, which does make him very, very good. But it does cost you fights first. And that is a big issue. The other issue is that Flawless Blades aren't really that good at the moment either, so I think adding Lucius to Flawless Blades does help bring Flawless Blades up, but it also kind of lowers Lucius's potential. So it's one of those situations where Flawless Blades, they really want Lucius to be attached to them, but he would much rather be by himself running solo, and he's definitely much better doing it that way. So it's certainly an option, and if you love Flawless Blades and you aren't playing at a super competitive level, it can be a very, very, very nasty unit to pump out a huge amount of damage. Lucius with 6 Flawless Blades can do over 30 wounds into an Imperial Knight if they use their Demonic Patrons rule, so it can be incredibly brutal in combat. It's just that in that situation, Lucius himself does nearly half of that damage output, so it's just, is it worth spending 220 points to get those extra bodies when Lucius is so good all by himself, and arguably in some situations more survivable by himself because he will get that lone op and fight first to protect him? So there are some options to running him, but yeah, I would play him by himself just as this small little tech piece that can be quite safe from enemy shooting. He can get around reasonably fast, get to where you need him to be, and just go in and assassinate characters and kill off not anything too big. Although he gets rerolls against walkers, so like knights and dreadnoughts, they aren't his best target because he is only still strength 8, so likely wounding them on 5s. But killing characters and maybe some lighter walkers or lighter monsters or medium monsters like Carnifexes, that can be a very, very good use for him. Of course, on top of that, Lucius can be made even more effective in a few of the detachments that the Emperor's Children have, and he does actually get some good use out of most of them. So Mercurial Host is the first. This gives a very plain but quite strong detachment ability of reroll advance rolls. Now, it's not super flashy, but when you have an army that can advance and charge on a lot of their things, in fact on everything if you charge into different things, that gives you a load of reliability. And for a unit like Lucius, who really does need to be in combat, this can make him even more of a threat. He obviously doesn't get the benefit of any enhancements being a epic character, but a few of the strats can also help him out. You can get sustained hits from Violent Excess or an auto 6-inch advance from Honor the Prince, so you can make him a lot deadlier and also get him a much more reliable threat range with that auto 6-inch advance. Next up we have Peerless Bladesman. This is in my opinion probably the best one for him, and it also makes a lot of sense fluff-wise given his lore as a duelist. This one lets you pick either lethal or sustained hits after you've made a charge move. And what that means is the Blade of the Lair especially can get a huge boost in its damage output. Getting some extra hits or even auto wounds if you're up against tough things like dreadnoughts or knights can make Lucius do so much more damage. Against something like Terminators with a character attached, for instance, he will go from doing just under 3 unsaved wounds, so almost killing 3 Terminators, to pretty much guaranteeing that 3 will die with the sustained hit. The average goes from about 2.6 unsaved wounds, without the sustained hits buff to around 3.1 with it. So it's not a huge difference, but it can mean a whole extra Terminator dead. So it is definitely something noteworthy that could keep Lucius alive in a combat. It also means on the lash, if you were against targets that was going into, you could be getting sustained and lethal hits, which of course makes him even more terrifying into things like guardsman squads. So it is a very, very good detachment for him. It can just turn him into a much better blender or character assassin. And as a quick aside, just to note, the average of 2.6 unsaved wounds against Terminators, that means against Abaddon in this detachment, if you choose sustained hits, he goes from 2.6 average unsaved to 3.1. So in this detachment, he has a much, much, much better chance of killing Abaddon in a single round of combat. I think it goes from something like a just around 50% chance to about 65% chance of killing Abaddon in one round of combat. So he is actually not guaranteed, but he's much more likely to be able to just one-shot Abaddon in a single round of combat, which can be really, really strong if your opponent is kind of using Abaddon as a linchpin unit in their army. The Coterie of the Conceited is also a fairly nice detachment in terms of what it unlocks. It unlocks some cumulative buffs over the course of the game as you kill more enemy units and gain more pact points. It can take a little while to get rolling, but by the mid or end game, you could be looking at having a Lucius with both lethal and sustained hits that proc on a 5+. So it's really, really good in terms of potential. The issue with this one for me is that the first two buffs are kind of useless for him. They get you a reroll hit and wound roll of 1, which, whilst they are both something that can come into effect for Lucius, most of the time you are going to have Lucius in combat with his key targets anyway, as in a character, a monster, or a walker. So you will have those full rerolls anyway. So those first two buffs, most of the time I think won't do anything for him. But by the last few turns of the game, that can turn Lucius into an absolute monster of damage output, getting lethal and sustained on a 5+ with his 3 damage attacks from the Blade of the Lair is incredibly strong. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, Lucius is pricey. 150 points isn't cheap, but I do think he is very, very powerful. He's got some great defense. He's got some great mobility. He's, a lone operative. He can fight first. He is absolutely devastating in combat, especially against things like enemy characters. Now, he doesn't bring anything to the Flawless Blades, so in terms of buffing your army, he doesn't really do anything himself. But as we've gone through before, that's fine, because realistically, you want this guy running solo to, in many cases, be even more durable thanks to Lone Operative, and of course, the threat he can put out of Heroic Intervention. His profile, having that great movement, having the army rule of advance and charge, just means he can threaten huge swathes of the board with his presence. So just being there can make your opponent kind of second guess their plans or change how they're going to move one of their scary melee units, which can let you control an objective or control a side of the board, or just set yourself up to be in a better position for some shooting with your noise marines or something like that. He can just really, really impact how your opponent plays, and that can absolutely win you games. So I do think he is genuinely competitive. I also think he's really fun if you are just playing a more casual game, because he is, as I've said, such a cool character lore-wise. He's got a great model, he's got some great rules. He is just really good fun to play. Worth noting, he isn't invincible, as I've said. He will die quickly if he gets stuck into the wrong combat. Toughness 5 and a 2-up, 4-up is fairly standard as far as things go. The 5-up Feel No Pain definitely does help, but he is, at the end of the day, just a slightly buffed up Marine profile, so he is very killable. At 150 points, you really don't want him to die too soon. But despite all that, I still think personally he is pretty much an auto take in most Emperor's Children armies at the moment. Even if you bring him as just a character assassin or a way to dictate how your opponent moves, he can very, very easily make his 150 points worth of value just from that alone. And that is going to be Lucius the Eternal. As always, I'd love to know what you think of his profile and his datasheet. Do you think he is worth 150 points? And if so, how do you tend to use him? Do you run him solo, or do you run him with the Flawless Blades? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later guys.